Bonjour.
Hello, everyone.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Ok, je vais pouvoir commencer. Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
So hello, everyone, and welcome to this virtual workshop number 6 on building and construction, sustainable building and construction in Africa.
Interprétation simultanée, si vous avez besoin de suivre cette session en anglais, il suffit de cliquer sur l'icône du globe.
There is live translation.
So if you need to follow this session in English, we have live translation available. Just click on the globe at the bottom of the screen to follow the session in English. Donc, je vais juste introduire très rapidement.
I'm going to introduce speakers and myself, Eva Radek, in charge of events and the coalitions at Climate Change. I'm here together with my colleague Tanya, who is also in charge of the observatory for our programs. The name of our virtual workshop today, if you have any questions or comments, and we're going to talk about sustainable building and construction. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the session. Again, thank you all for joining this session. We've had over 200 people who registered on this topic of sustainable building and construction, which is a very popular topic, which requires also more attention. So this is a great honor for us to have you on this call today. Just to remind you about Climate Change, who we are an international organization founded in 2015 prior to the COP21. And the purpose of this organization is to federate all the non-state actors involved in fighting against climate change. We do this with a number of coalitions, non-state actors, coalitions, mainly in Africa. Just to give you some context for this workshop, we started the second cycle of workshops last February, so we could cover all the various topics of all the coalitions. And this second cycle of workshops is running from mid-February to mid-June of this year. You can check on our website at Climate Change to hear about the coming workshops. Today's workshop is talking about the challenges of sustainable building and construction in Africa. And the title is actually Building a Consensus, Progress in Sustainable Buildings and Construction Driven by African Non-State Actors. Just to remind you of the purposes and the goals of this workshop, we're going to validate together the new roadmap of the coalition, which was updated thanks to all your comments and all your feedback since we run our first cycle of workshops. So thank you again for all your comments. And we will together validate this new updated roadmap for 2021. Our second goal will be to move on our second goal, which is the sharing of best practices and knowledge in the area of building and construction in Africa, so that we can better understand what are the needs in this sector. And a third objective for this session, which will be to make sure that we have more interaction with all our participants and a time of questions and answers, so we can feel like this is a real workshop as if we were physically present. So please do not hesitate to post your questions in the chat box so we can take a look at them at the end of the session. There will be a time for this. Now we are going to share a small survey, just 2 questions, which we have prepared for you on menti.com. As you can see on the screen, www.menti.com, either on your mobile, on your computer. and use the code 85939621, which we're going to leave on the screen for now. And then we have two questions we would like to ask you, so we can take a look at the answers at the end of our sessions. And the questions are: what, according to you, are the challenges in this sector? And what, according to your example of sustainable buildings, that are simple and effective? I'm going to give the floor now to my colleague Tanya, and we will come back to this later on. I'll now give the floor to Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. I will be switching to English now, and I will be introducing our three panelists for today before we begin. So today on the panel, we have with us, first up, Jonathan Duwyn, who is representing the United Nations Environment Programme and the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, which is an alliance for net zero emission and resilient buildings, which aims to raise ambition to meet Paris climate targets and mobilize all actors across the value chain. We also have with us Thomas Granier, who is the director and co-founder of the association Voûte Nubienne, which aims to raise awareness and transfer technical knowledge about the Nubian Voûte method across the Sahelian region. And we also have with us Mr. Amadou Dème, who is the co-founder and director of Elementerre, which produces ready-to-use ecological building materials in Senegal. So without further ado, I will hand over the floor to Jonathan, who will present the GlobalABC's regional roadmap for Africa and its key takeaways. And then we could see how this roadmap of this particular coalition, which is meeting today, fits in within the GlobalABC's larger roadmap. Thank you. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. So as mentioned, I'm Jonathan Duwyn. I work for the United Nations Environment Programme. And one of the specific initiatives that we have is the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, which was launched at COP21 in Paris with the idea to build commitments and raise, let's say, mobilize stakeholders around the buildings and construction sector, which is a major contributor to global emissions. So that was the main idea. Today, the network has 30 governments and then a wide range of organizations from the private sector and public sector, including universities. I'll talk today about our roadmap, but one of the other flagship products is our global status report. So each year we issue a global status report that explains the progress in terms of buildings and construction towards let's say, the Paris Agreement more specifically. Of course, we're looking towards a long-term, let's say, zero carbon buildings, which is probably a lot of wishful thinking, but we have to be ambitious. And other aspects, of course, are related to resource efficiency in general and the resilience. So sorry, just making sure you can see my slides. Just looking at Africa specifically, we know that there's already a very important backlog in terms of housing, with about 51 million units that actually are missing today. And on top of that, we also know that urbanization is growing and population growth at the same time, and it's increasing the demand of buildings and infrastructure. It is expected that the floor area of buildings will be doubling between now and 2050, with 90% actually for the residential sector specifically. And if we think specifically about the UEMOA region, there the population is expected to grow over 100 million in the next 2 decades, so in 20 years, and it is envisaged that an additional 800,000 housing units are needed per year. So that shows that, you know, the buildings and construction sector is a very dynamic sector. and that the demand will only grow. And so that means also that the impacts are growing. Now, this can see as a challenge, but is also an opportunity. I mean, today, when we think about the situation that the world is living with COVID-19, we can expect that working on specifically this sector can help going towards a greener recovery. And there can be many opportunities, especially in terms of jobs. I mean, in most of the countries, the construction sector is a major provider of jobs and is about 20% of GDP in most of the countries. So it's a quite important sector for economies in general. I'm not going to enter into the details, but this is just to show the importance of the emissions and the energy use in the sector. So it's one of the major uses of energies in the building and construction sector. And emissions from energy in the building sector are about 39% of the GHG emissions from the energy sector. And when we look specifically at Africa, the Africa building sector in 2018 was 61% of final energy use in the continent. So it's a major energy use. When we talk about final energy use, of course, we're talking about both like the construction part, but then also the operation of buildings, the use of the buildings. And then it mentions 32% of energy-related CO2 emissions, which are not including all the emissions that are coming from manufacturing and building materials. So it's clearly a key sector if we want to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement, and it's an important element to be integrated in the national determined contributions of the countries, the NDCs. One of the major issues, I would say, to promote energy or sustainability in the building sector and reducing emissions is actually the use of energy building codes. And if you look at Africa, there are actually a very little number of countries that currently have energy building codes. Only Morocco and Tunisia currently have one that covers the entire building sector, Ghana and Nigeria that cover only part of the sector. And then there are some voluntary codes in Egypt and South Africa. A number of countries are currently working on developing building code standards, but the remaining 38 countries are yet to come up with the energy building codes. So, I mean, the codes are seen as one of the major tools, at least from the government side, to help making this transformation in the sector. And so that is, I think, one of the major challenges when we look at Africa specifically. Now, if you look at the NDCs, actually most of the African countries have referenced buildings and construction in their NDCs, which is quite logical, of course, when we know about the population growth and the issue of housing in general in the region, the urbanization. But at the same time, when we look at the NDCs, there is not really a strong commitment, let's say, towards going net zero buildings. And there are not yet really concrete targets and measures. I mean, this might be related also to the fact that data is really a challenge in most of the countries. And actually, to come up with clear targets and measures, it's important to understand properly the sector and to use, the proper data and information to come up with the right targets and the measures. Now, a regional roadmap was developed for Africa. The GlobalABC has identified 8 kind of activity areas if you want to kind of really transform the buildings and construction sector and succeed into a holistic transformation. So it's important to look at issues related to urban planning, because of course, if you think about a building is in an environment, and the environment around it also influences how the building operates or how efficient the building is. This can be specifically looked into when we talk about, for example, cooling. And in cities, we know that it's often warmer in the center of cities because there's so much concrete that is just accumulating the heat and redistributing it in the city. So there is a critical element to look at urban planning when looking at addressing the issues of emissions and climate change into the building sector. I mean, this is also important because local governments often have, I don't know exactly how it works in Africa, unfortunately, and also it depends from one country to the other. But in many cases, it's actually the local governments that have a strong role in terms of implementing building codes. And sometimes even they are in charge of the building codes. They're also the ones that are in charge of giving out building permits. So they have very strong role in terms of helping with this whole process. The second area that we look into is new buildings. And new buildings, I think, is very relevant because of the slides I said earlier in terms of the buildings and construction in Africa with the projected upcoming, all the buildings that will still need to be built. And it's important to actually be ready to look at the design stage of buildings and start already integrating all the aspects of decarbonization, let's say. So there, I mean, we are, let's say, promoting the idea of developing decarbonization strategies and roadmaps and implementing building energy codes, as I was mentioning earlier. And I mentioned, of course, when you look at building energy codes, it's not only about energy efficient appliances and the operation of the building, but it's also how can you come up with strategies where actually you do not need energy for cooling because you actually introduce some passive design and other type of technology solutions. There's the part of existing buildings, which I think is less of a priority for a continent like Africa, but still there are a number of existing buildings. Some of them will need to be retrofitted. And in that case, it's also important to look at the performance of those buildings and how you can improve their energy consumption. So that's an important element. There's the issue of building operations, and there we talk more about the maintenance and management of buildings. And so there it's more thinking about doing proper monitoring of your buildings. So there we can introduce things like building passports to understand better the needs for maintenance and to follow the progress of a building over time. Then there's a category on appliances and systems. So that's the appliances that actually the users are going to use in their buildings. So there it's actually promoting minimum energy performance standards, I would say, for appliances and equipment, and also integrating those type of aspects in public procurement. A lot is actually already happening in that area. I know that, I mean, from other programs that we're working on in UNEP, there's quite a bit of work done on minimum energy performance standards for air conditioners, lighting, and these are things that are being taken up in countries. Another important element is the materials. Materials today, I mean, the model that is used by most countries is actually an old model coming from, I would say, the developed countries that came with concrete, steel, and glass as being like the main tools for your building, with the idea also that at the time where these type of buildings were constructed, it was also the moment where we came up with air conditioners. So everybody thought like you can build any building that you want. In any case, we'll always be able to cool it because we have the technologies to cool your building. Unfortunately, now we know that those technologies for cooling the building have other impacts because of energy consumption and CO2 emissions, and that is not the solution anymore. So there's a very important element to look at materials and designs that can actually be better tailored to the local climates. Most of the time,
Jonathan, I'm really sorry, you have 1 minute left.
Wow, that's really short. Yeah, I speak too much, I knew. Okay, but let me try to go very quickly. But so materials is also the issue of embodied carbon. So it's important to look at materials that actually during the manufacturing of the material, it doesn't consume already too much energy and generates not too much emission. There's the whole issue of resilience and adaptation. So integrating aspects of resilience into buildings and the development of buildings. and then overall the access to clean energy, so integrate the solar energy or renewable energy in building systems. I'm not going to run over these few slides that were more entering into a specific detailed activity of the Africa roadmap, which was for new buildings. But maybe I'll just mention a few issues that were actually noted during developing the roadmap. Is that actually there's really a data gap, and there's of course, when we think about Africa, there's a big participation of the informal sector. A lot of people build their own houses, and that is something that is absolutely not controlled and very little information about in terms of, and also very difficult to kind of control. So that's an issue that for the moment it's difficult to kind of come up with the right solutions, I would say. But what I realized from some of the work that we're doing on roadmaps at the moment in countries, that actually it's very difficult to find the right data. In terms of what the stakeholder groups need to do, when we talk about the policymaker, it's really about building codes and integrating passive design, integrating resilience, integrating a life cycle approach, and looking at sustainably sourced materials. And then when we talk about designers, for example, it's really about integrating the issues of low carbon, cost-effective technology into the design stage of the building. And that's where the architects and the planners and the engineers can intervene. Now, we are working a lot. I know that in the roadmap that you are presenting from, for the coalition, you're looking at also getting roadmaps at the national level, which is a little bit next step that we're looking into in the GlobalABC. And we are currently working in 2 countries and developing a specific toolkit for developing those national roadmaps based on the GlobalABC model. And we have 2 pilots running, one in Vietnam and Cambodia. And the way we are doing it is that we are linking it directly to the NDC, and we are coming up with short-term, medium-term, and long-term targets on each of the 8 activity areas. What we realized is that those roadmaps are just like more as a guiding document for the government to know where they need to go in the sector, but that it will need some regular revision and updates. And this is mainly related to the fact that a lot of data is not available today and will hopefully become available later and change some of the aspects of the roadmap. I mean, quickly in terms of, the process, the way that we work on the roadmaps is that it's a nationally driven process through a stakeholder group where we bring the different constituency around the table. It's important that it's country owned and that you actually have all the different representatives from the value chain of buildings and construction represented when looking at those priorities, and to align it with the national objective. So our idea is to set a kind of advocacy coalition in place at the country level, work with that coalition to develop the roadmap, identify first understanding the reality, so the baseline, looking at identifying the priorities on that basis, and then developing the roadmap, looking at prioritizing long-term, medium-term, sorry.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm really going to have to cut you short there.
Yeah, just maybe one thing I would like to add is that we are now going to work in Burkina Faso specifically on the issue of materials. And I saw that's also something that you have in your objectives. And that we are working also a lot on trying to introduce the idea of building passports. But in Burkina Faso, we're going to look at a roadmap with a stronger focus on all the issues related to materials. So that's also something that can be interesting. And under the roadmap side, we also have a coordination group on the roadmap. So if other partners are working on roadmaps, we welcome them to join our coordination group on roadmaps to exchange experience with peers in different countries. So sorry that I was way too long. I'll do better next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that wonderful and extremely informative presentation. Et maintenant, on va repasser au français. Et notre
Now switching
prochain
back to
intervenant est
French,
M. Thomas
and
Granier,
therefore English for
qui est le
translation. My
directeur
next
général
speaker
et
is the
cofondateur de
General
l'association
Director and
La Voûte
founder
Nubienne,
of the Nubian
et
Voûte,
qui présentera
Thomas
ce qu'il faut
Granier,
retenir dans notre
and
approche
he
des
will
bâtiments
present
durables en Afrique à partir du travail
what we
de
have
la
to
Voûte Nubienne
remember
au Sahel.
from this project called the Nubian Vault, which is a construction project.
Merci, Tania, Eva.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Eva. Thank you to the climate change team. I'm not going to present the program of the Nubian Vault, which you can find easily on our website and in our documents. I would quickly say that we've been working on this project for over 20 years. And AVN, which is a Nubian Vault, has been developing a resilient and adapted architecture in sub-Saharan African, and we have built in over 1,000 cities, over 5,000 plants, or projects that have been developed already. We hope to reach the goal of 1,000 places by 21-22. We are founding members of the GlobalABC, and it's our great honor and pleasure to take part in this great coalition. Now, the idea here is to offer some reflection axis regarding the roadmap. First of all, I think it's very important, and I would say that my expertise stops at the Sahelian region. It's important, however, to think about developing housing for the greater number, that is, to target beneficiaries who come mainly from the rural areas, which is the great majority of people from the Sahelian region. These are people coming from rural areas, so we want to target people who will benefit from our programs and our actions in order to maximize our efforts and to offer our program to those who need it the most. We also want to choose technologies and materials which are truly resilient, coming from short economy or circle economy, and which are standardized and easy to use or ready to use, so that these techniques and these materials could be easily be duplicated and be implemented in the future building approaches in terms of training also, and being able to meet the needs of our customers. Now we can talk about the dynamic of the markets. We've always built our action on the fact that the market is both the judge of the architectural or technical offers, but if we are not in a position to have a growing market, therefore our proposal were not necessarily adapted. And the market dynamics are the main tools for communicating. When we talk about market dynamics, we mean having subsidies with a range of stakeholders, from informal economy to formal economy, from rural targets to urban targets, or private to public or community targets. On the other hand, we are also doing a marketing support to make this market grow and develop around the market a profitable environment. We also need to talk about training. We need to develop further our training techniques to make them more inclusive, to make sure that occupational training could welcome maybe younger people who are more vulnerable, who are outside of their regular education, who are great targets for this sector. What I call a farmer who is also a mason. There is a great variety of employment and jobs, and we need to have a concrete mix between the training, professional training, and the demand of the market. The training has to include the market dynamics and have a dual approach, if you like, which is absolutely essential. In that sense, we need to value the trainers, the craftspeople who come from the informal sector, and we need to help them find their place so they can really deploy their capacities as trainers. Now, to this, we also need to add incentive initiatives. The populations of Europe should not be the only one benefiting from incentive initiatives to develop their housing towards a greener energy, better environmental performances, climate performances, etc., and not to have these same assets offered to the African population or sub-Saharan populations, which not only do not contribute much to the climate change, but do not have access to better performances, but yet they are the one that will endure the greatest consequences. There is a difference, a gap of balance, a lack of balance between these populations. There is a gap. How can these populations, therefore these people, how can they also benefit from incentive initiatives for ecological building? Another proposal is to also support these initiatives either through microfinance, through financial borrowings, etc., to also couple this with other devices. Now, regarding reduction of carbon emissions, this should be potentialized, and we could have virtual circles in which the carbon performance could feed into the initiatives. That's also another very important aspect. We should be able to plan these financial tools which do not come from cooperation or from development, but which come from other backgrounds, just to support and reinforce the emerging market of ecological building. There should be a change of practices, and this requires great efforts in terms of training and awareness. In West Africa, for example, many community buildings in the health sector, education sector, and other fields, these buildings have been made through fundings coming from the north. So there is a responsibility from these people to build differently, from funding bodies and other stakeholders, to make this sector evolve in a positive way and to show an interest for African companies to develop better performing materials. There is a responsibility from contractors and funders to reach best and better practices. I'm sure that these funders from the north and contractors would be very happy. Just to remind us that public fundings in France pay for buildings in Africa for food storing on techniques which are not allowed in France. If we look at the energy performance, there is something that is quite striking, and there is something to be done. Now, regarding the roadmap, let's not try to focus on Senegal too much. Of course, Senegal is Sahel. I think we should not have an approach that would be too Senegal focused. Of course, it's always interesting to focus on a country or have a country, but Dakar does not represent the whole of Senegal, and Senegal does not represent the whole, or the rest of Senegal rather represents more of what's happening in the Sahel region. And I'm done, I think, and I think I kept to my time. Is that right?
Oui, en fait, merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas Granier.
Si vous ne l'avez pas encore fait, merci d'aller sur.
If you have not done it, so you can go on the menti.com website to answer our 2 questions of our little survey. We're now going to give the floor to the founder of Elementerre, Senegal, and he's going to present the activities of Elementerre in Senegal. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. Thank you for these interesting discussions. I have not prepared a PowerPoint, so I'll be rather quick just to explain what we are doing at Elementerre. I'm an engineer, civil engineer, and I knew when I was studying that I would not specialize in concrete construction. So I came back to Senegal after my studies, and I realized the issue of materials and the concrete. And Jonathan and Thomas both mentioned that. And the idea was to try to find some solutions to build differently. I was in Grenoble as a student. So I went to Crater, which is in Grenoble. And after Crater, the idea was to try to look at ways of working in a company that would really build from earth, using earth. In Senegal, we did not have that structure yet. There were a few initiatives, but no specific companies doing that kind of construction. So with my associate, we thought about building a company to make this kind of material accessible. Not that it did not exist. Of course, it's been existing for a long time. This has existed for a long time, but it needed to be maybe more contemporary, to be more accessible for people to be able to use it. What we realize is that most people do not realize that it's possible to build with earth. Of course, today everything is organized so that people would build with concrete material. Everywhere we want to make concrete bricks, etc., blocks. We don't really think about the insulation of our buildings. We think in the worst case, we would put air conditioning. Of course, that's an easy solution. But we need to think about the material and the design of the building so we won't have to spend energy in order to live in a comfortable way in those buildings. We have many projects, many buildings that have been built in different areas and cities in Senegal. But we realize often that not much is happening. Often the project comes from outside. These are experts from the outside. who come and do the study, and at the end of the project there is no real monitoring except the building that is left to itself, which is not often or always understood by a population which cannot identify with the building, and therefore they tend to believe this is not for them. So the idea here was to think about the way that we should use local materials and to make it accessible to a larger number, that this is something that we can do. We do have local material, we just need to know how to use them. That's the purpose of Elementerre, our company. We produce different materials. We work for some years now with Mr. John in the chat, with Granier and other partners. We have developed typher-based products, materials, which is considered as a negative product, but we have so much of it, and we realize that we can use it to make a light material, heavy material. It can be used for all kinds of things, for filling. So we're trying to adapt to the materials that we have and develop as many materials as possible to build. Now, of course, we need to comply to the standards. I think it's something that will happen. This kind of material have been actually used for a long time, but most of the time people have forgotten. We just need to relearn how to use these products. We need to create a whole sector from the conception to all the way to the implementation. That's what we are trying to do. So we have positioned ourselves on this principle that in the past we followed the companies doing concrete and so on, but we are actually able to do other things to meet other needs for individuals, for public buildings. There are many things that can be done. We also do a bit of training. The idea is really to position ourselves with our philosophy of using as much as possible everything that is at our disposal, like any other company, building company, and we're not interested in solely concrete buildings, but if we are looking at a building that is thinking about using alternative materials, etc., then we are more interested, and we can support such a project with all the technical aspects that it requires and help build some of those buildings. We are limited. We are a small company. Of course, we cannot cover all the projects, but the purpose is really to do as much as possible and to make sure that the conception of the building has been thought through in an efficient way. That's really what I can say. I'm ready to answer some questions. Maybe I could talk about our future development with all of these material that we produce, is to scale up and show what can be done. We have built many individual homes. In Senegal, it's difficult to go and work in the north or in the south. We don't have the tools or the equipment for that. So hopefully, little by little, we will manage to expand. We want to first learn how to manage what we are doing locally, developing materials, making them accessible. Instead of just building houses here and there, what we want to do is maybe develop a whole sector, develop 10 houses in one particular area. We need to test different things, and we will keep on improving ourselves as we go along. Once the buildings are built and they are functional, we can have no negative reports. So we need new buildings. That's what I can say as far as I'm concerned. Thank you very much for your presentation. Yes, indeed. We have a very concrete example. Thank you very much. The Elementerre project was published on our mapping at Climate Change. And all the people who are listening to this call today who may have projects on sustainable building and development in Africa, please share your projects, your initiatives, so we can have even more visibility through our mapping. Let's now look at all the various questions and rather at the survey faced from menti.com. See if we could. I did see that Jonathan answered already a question via the chat box. We did have a question that was sent to us by email, which would be a good starting point. I don't know if Thomas or Jonathan or Doudou, any of you. I'm going to read it to you, and then we'll see who can answer this question. According to you, what kind of building do we need for population on the coastline? It's a wide question, depending on the various types of materials. And another question, in sub-Saharan Africa, the use of AC is become a tool for fighting heat. Could we build in an ecological manner without the air conditioning? I know Jonathan touched a little bit on that. I don't know if one of you would like to answer these two questions. I could answer this. Yes, it is absolutely possible to build building without the air conditioning. Of course, this is something that needs to be thought through and designed beforehand. The challenge here is to build. The difficulty would be to build a building and then realize it's not, adapted for the conditions. But if we think about it before and conceive the building prior to the building phase, and of course it is possible to build something and think about the insulation. There are various possibilities, various materials. In our context here, our purpose is to use a material that would not use much energy in making it and not using much energy once it is built. So these are the important points. It's not to say that this is the new model that should be done everywhere. The idea here is to look at what we have and from there on develop a material depending on the kind of dirt, earth we have, soil that we have. That's when we start conceiving the various materials which we will then produce and manufacture. And that's, I believe, how we can be more efficient. Thank you for your answer, Thomas. Now, regarding the idea of building without AC or ventilation, the purpose is not to get rid of it completely when we have very extremely high temperatures going up to 50 degrees or so. Let's not dream about that. But what we need, however, is that we should be able to develop buildings which could be as performant as possible to decrease the need for energy. The purpose, therefore, is not to say zero energy, but to reduce it greatly with good performances, mainly through the earth materials. Again, this should be done at a wider scale. What matters the most is to be able to bring those expertise and technological qualities to the larger number of people. I don't have much to add to what has been said already. But in the past, I think people were used to adapting to their climate. So people were building, depending on where they were coming from, they knew how to protect themselves. Of course, I agree with Thomas. with the terrible increase of temperatures, we may not be able to completely do without the air conditioning and so on. But there are many technologies already which exist to cool houses, natural air, the way we build the buildings, the orientation of the building to the sun, the various openings, etc. There are many other ways which people already know about, which we haven't really used because we had a different approach to construction, which is no longer adapted to our climate. Thank you for your answers. Our survey on Menti, we will actually send you the answers by email because we need to move on now to the roadmap. We have 9 minutes left, so we're going to do that now, and we will send you the answers of the survey by email.
Thank you, Eva. I'm going to be presenting the roadmap of the coalition, which we had already shared with the coalition members earlier this week, and it has been open to consultation since then. So this roadmap is basically divided into 3 sections. The first one is where are we now? And this section essentially lists and details the state of the buildings and construction sector in Africa right now, and the potential for action in the future. And now moving on to the second part rather quickly, this section is where would we like to go? And this one lists out the objectives that the coalition would like to adopt for itself. And we have tried to divide these objectives under different headings, such as the potential for synergy between the different members of the coalition, the key questions and levers for action within the coalition, and also going beyond just roadmaps and moving towards more country-specific roadmaps, which our speakers have already presented their views on, and also how this coalition and the work that we do here could eventually possibly contribute to the NDCs of the different African countries. And now the most important part of this roadmap is the third one, which is here. How do we wish to get there? How do we wish to attain these objectives that we've listed? And this is the part of the roadmap which is open to consultation. For the moment, we've listed these actions, such as a mapping of all the actors, which we have been working on. You can see the results on our website, on all the links that we've mentioned here that we will send to you in the chat, in the mail that follows up from this session. And we also maintain the coalition's mailing list, which I'm sure a lot of you are already a part of. And we're also actively looking to have country-specific roadmaps. And this is the part where we would like to hear from you about the actions which you think could contribute, and also about best practices, which we've listed here, such as la Voûte Nubienne and Elementerre, about both of which we heard today. So now we will be opening the floor to the participants. If you would like to comment on the roadmap, which is open to consultation, we request you to use the raise hand function on Zoom, or let us know in the chat, and we will let you have the floor. If you have no comments on the roadmap, of course, we'd also be open to having anyone that has questions for the wonderful panel that we had today. And also, if you'd like to present any projects that you have implemented, which you think are exemplary in this particular domain, which you would like to shed light on. All right. If we don't seem to have any at the moment, you can always reach back to us on mail. And oh, yes, I see that Mr. Granier has raised his hand and would like to speak. Mr. Granier, you have the floor.
Et je voudrais rajouter juste quelque chose sur ce qu'on appelle l'habitat social.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about social housing in Africa. From what I know, West Africa, Sahel, the social housing, which is not really social, we're talking about buildings between 7 and 15 millions, and we know what the minimum wage of these people are. So these are mainly for people who do have employment, stable employments, civil servants, etc. So I think there is a point there to be discussed and to really develop the whole idea, concept of social housing, to help the various ministries and governments in charge of this issue of social housing to also discuss and tackle the topic of self-construction and the issue of social housing. How can we socialize these projects of social housing, make them greener, to not fall in the trap of social private partnerships where we have inappropriate housing funded from mysterious type of fundings from people who have no goal as such in terms of development. So we need to take this further, how to develop further the social housing and make sure that this is done.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Granier, for that interesting commentary. And now, if there's no one else who would like to speak, I'd like to pass the floor back to my colleague Eva, who has some interesting news to share with us about some events that we have lined up for you. Over to you, Eva.
Oui, c'est ça. Je profite de ces quelques minutes restantes.
I'll take this opportunity just to tell you about our next event at Climate Change. At this moment, we have some of our colleagues in Dakar who are doing a press conference for signing the next Climate Change Coalition Summit in Africa, which will take place during the week of 13th to the 17th of September 2021. It is therefore an event, an hybrid event with both people who would be at a distance via conference calls and people will be physically present. So this project has already started, and officially today we actually launched the call for contribution to share our best practices and identify potential new actors working on the 9 topics of our African coalition, which I will try to list, but I'm sure you can find them again on our website. Of course, we have the building and sustainable building construction, development of sustainable cities, agriculture, reforestation, food, circular economy, mobility and transport, adaptation, education, access to climate finance, adaptation. No, I don't. These are the topics that we cover, but the call for contribution is now open, and we will select the various project managers or officers who could either come and join a physical workshop or simply pitch their projects as part of the pitch workshop, which we will be organizing, or simply to publish on our website their project. It's officially open since today. please do not hesitate to visit our website, and we will send you all the various links in the coming days. Please share the news around. This will be one of our first physical events, and we are very glad to be able to share this news with you. There will be many opportunities for participating, whether it be through virtual workshops or in physical presence. I've seen many questions on the roadmap, so we will send it back to you by email. All those who took part in our workshop today, if you have, again, any particular projects which you may like to highlight either on our mapping or on our roadmap, please do not hesitate to send them to us. This was the main announcement which I wanted to make today. If we have no other reactions or comments from our participants or from our speakers, and we will end this session. Again, thank you for joining us today. This coalition is the coalition that has the lowest number of participants, but we were glad to have 70 or so people here with us today. So thank you all for joining. And thank you for all your questions sent by email or by the chat box. It's a great pleasure to meet every other week. Again, I want to thank you all, and I want to thank our interpreter, Dominique, for translating all of our discussions. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you then. Bye-bye, and we will see you soon then. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Merci à tous. À bientôt.
À bientôt. Bon courage.
Merci beaucoup. À bientôt.